This little girl, barely 6 years old, pleaded for help from a millionaire while holding a black trash bag. What was inside will shock you. Comment what you think is going to happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The rain poured relentlessly over Oakhaven that July afternoon, turning the streets into small, muddy streams. The clock on the car dashboard read 5:43 p.m. when Theodore Ted Vasconcelos adjusted his Italian silk tie in the rearview mirror of his latest model Mercedes. His deep brown eyes, marked by dark circles from sleepless nights, reflected the weariness of another intense day of negotiations. The parking lot of the largest supermarket in the Vasconcelos chain was virtually empty. At that hour, only a few hurried employees rushed to their cars, shielding themselves from the rain with newspapers or files. Ted watched the activity from a distance, as he always did. At 47, he had built an empire in the retail business, but the price of this achievement was etched on his hardened features, aged by time and loneliness. He was about to start the car when a sudden movement caught his attention. A small figure emerged from the shadows between two cars, carrying something that looked like a black trash bag. His business instincts immediately alerted him to possible shoplifting, but there was something different about that silhouette. It was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her clothes, soaked by the rain, clung to her frail body. Dark, tangled hair partially covered her face, but couldn't hide the despair in her eyes. "Please, mister, help him," the little one begged, her voice trembling as much as her body. Tears mingled with the rainwater on her dirty face. Ted felt an involuntary urge to ignore her. He had important meetings, urgent commitments, a meticulously planned life where there was no room for the unexpected. But something in the child's eyes paralyzed him. The trash bag in her arms moved. "What do you have there?" he asked, his voice harsher than he intended. The girl, who he would later discover was named Juniper, clutched the bag to her chest. "I found him in the dumpster. He's breathing really weak." Ted got out of the car, completely forgetting about the rain now soaking his $2,000 suit. He approached cautiously, as if fearing what he might find. The girl, trembling, pulled back a piece of the black plastic. The shock was instant. There, wrapped in a dirty blanket, was a newborn baby. The umbilical cord was still present, and his skin had a purplish hue that made Ted's blood run cold. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice now unrecognizable, even to himself. "Over there," Juniper pointed to the back of the parking lot. There was a woman. She was crying. Then she ran away. Without thinking twice, Ted took the baby from the girl's arms. The small body was freezing. "Get in the car," he ordered, surprised by his own decision. Juniper hesitated, her big eyes showing fear and distrust. "I'm going to take you to the hospital. He needs urgent help," he explained, already opening the back door of the vehicle. The drive to Oakhaven General Hospital was a blur of ignored red lights and angry honks. Ted, who had always prized absolute control of his emotions, felt his heart pounding in his chest like it hadn't in years. In the rear-view mirror, he watched Juniper holding the baby with a care that seemed impossible for someone so small. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep the girl awake, as he had noticed she was trembling more and more. "Juniper," she replied softly, without taking her eyes off the baby. "And he's Liam." "Liam, do you know him?" The girl shook her head negatively. "I just think he looks like a Liam." Upon arriving at the hospital, Ted carried the baby in his arms, running towards the emergency room with Juniper on his heels. The receptionist barely had time to react. When he rushed past, yelling for help, that's when Dr. Lavinia stepped in. Tall, carrying her 38 years with dignity in her impeccably white coat, she immediately took control of the situation. Her green eyes quickly assessed the baby's condition while shouting orders to the staff. "How long has he been like this?" she asked, already initiating emergency procedures. "I don't know," Ted replied, feeling strangely helpless. The girl found him, but when he turned to point out Juniper, she had disappeared. The next few hours were a whirlwind of events. The baby was rushed to the neonatal ICU, while Ted found himself giving explanations to social workers and police officers. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Kleber, his partner, kept reminding him of the important meeting with investors that he was missing. But for the first time in a decade, Ted didn't care about business. His thoughts were divided between the baby fighting for life and the mysterious girl who had disappeared into the rainy night. He's going to survive. Dr. Lavinia's firm voice brought him back to reality. But those were decisive minutes. If you had taken any longer... Ted watched the doctor for a moment. There was something in her posture that intrigued him, a mixture of dedication and sadness that he couldn't decipher. "What about the girl?" he asked, surprised by his own concern. "No one saw her leave," Lavinia replied, frowning. "But she needs medical attention too. She was starting to get hypothermic." At that moment, looking through the hospital window, at the stormy night, Ted felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, the irresistible need to do something that had absolutely nothing to do with profit or power. He needed to find Juniper. What he didn't know was that that night would be just the beginning of a journey that would change not only his life, but everyone around him. And that the small being fighting for life in the neonatal ICU, along with the mysterious missing girl, would be the pieces that would begin to dismantle the empire of lies and secrets he had built over the years. The early hours dragged on at Oak Haven General Hospital. Ted remained seated in the waiting room, still with his soaked suit clinging to his body, unable to leave. His cell phone had died after countless unanswered calls from Kleber, but he barely noticed. His thoughts were fixed on little Juniper, disappeared into the darkness of the night. Dr. Lavinia reappeared in the hallway, now with her auburn hair tied in a messy bun, betraying the hours of intense work. She approached him with a cup of coffee. "You should go home, Mr. Vasconcelos," she said, extending the drink to him. "It's past 3 in the morning." Ted accepted the coffee, noticing the deep circles under the doctor's eyes. "You should too, Doctor." "Lavinia," she corrected, sitting in the chair next to him. "And I can't. I have 2 more shifts in a row." Something in the simplicity with which she spoke of her exhausting routine impressed him. It was so different from the corporate world he was used to, where people made a point of showing off the smallest sacrifice. "How's the baby?" he asked, trying to push the image of Juniper out of his mind. "Stable, but..." Lavinia hesitated, a wrinkle of concern forming on her forehead. "There's something I need to tell you. We found marks on his body. It seems like he was left alive in the trash." Ted felt his stomach churn. In his years running one of the largest supermarket chains in Minnesota, he had seen it all. Embezzlement, betrayals, scams. But cruelty against a defenseless child was something his brain refused to process. "That girl," Lavinia continued, her voice dropping a tone. "She saved his life. A few more minutes." A noise in the hallway interrupted the conversation. A young nurse ran towards them, breathless. "Doctor, the girl, she's back." Ted jumped up, knocking over his coffee. At the end of the hallway, soaked and trembling even more than before, was Juniper. But she wasn't alone. She was holding the hand of a grey-haired woman, simply but cleanly dressed, who supported her with affection. "I came to see Liam," Juniper said, her small voice echoing in the empty hallway. "Mrs. Eleanor said I could." The woman, who must have been around 67 years old, stepped forward. There was a dignity in her bearing that contrasted with her apparent life situation. "I'm Eleanor Hayes," she introduced herself, her impeccable diction revealing a refined education. "Little Juniper appeared at our makeshift shelter, very distressed about the baby she helped save." Lavinia was already examining Juniper, checking her temperature and vital signs. "You're freezing, dear. We need to warm you up." But the girl recoiled. "First, I want to see Liam. I promised him I'd come back." Ted watched the scene with a strange feeling in his chest. Something in Eleanor's eyes disturbed him, as if she knew him from somewhere. The woman, in turn, maintained a serene, almost enigmatic expression. "You can see the baby," Lavinia said, surprising everyone. "But first, you need to take a hot shower and change these wet clothes. We have some donated clothes here at the hospital." While Juniper was taken away by a nurse, Eleanor remained in the waiting room. Her gaze crossed with Ted's several times until she finally broke the silence. "You don't recognize me, do you, Mr. Vasconcelos?" Ted frowned, trying to search his memories. There was something familiar about that voice, that way of speaking. "Don't force yourself," she continued, a sad smile on her lips. "It was a long time ago. I was a friend of your mother, Margaret. I taught you in elementary school. Before everything changed." The revelation hit Ted like a punch in the stomach. Fragments of memory began to emerge. A cozy classroom, the smell of chalk, a young teacher who always had a gentle smile and words of encouragement. "Mrs. Hayes, from the St. Joseph Elementary School." She nodded, her eyes slightly watering. "The world turns in many ways, doesn't it? Who would have thought we'd meet like this?" Before they could continue the conversation, Juniper returned, now wearing clean, dry clothes, her hair still damp from the shower. Her eyes sparkled with anxiety. "Can I see him now?" Lavinia led everyone to the neonatal ICU. Through the glass, they could see little Liam, now clean and warm, connected to several machines that monitored his vital signs. His skin had regained a healthier color. "He's strong," Lavinia commented, watching the monitors, "but there's something that worries me. Preliminary tests indicate a rare genetic condition. We'll need to do more tests to confirm." Juniper pressed, her face against the glass, her eyes fixed on the baby. "He's going to be okay, right?" It was at that moment that Ted noticed something strange. The girl was breathing with difficulty, and her hands, resting on the glass, were trembling slightly. It wasn't just the cold anymore. Something was wrong. Lavinia noticed it too. In seconds, she was kneeling next to Juniper, checking her heart. Her rate. Her expression changed instantly. "We need to run some tests on you now, dear," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Your heart is beating differently." "I don't want to leave Liam alone," Juniper protested, but her voice was getting weaker. "I'll stay with him," Eleanor assured, placing her hand on the girl's shoulder. "I won't leave here for a minute." As Lavinia led Juniper away to perform the tests, Ted remained beside his former teacher, both watching the baby fighting for life. The silence between them was filled with unasked questions. How did you get into this situation?" he finally asked, his voice low and hesitant. Eleanor let out a deep sigh. "A story as old as it is sad, my dear. A financial blow, the loss of everything I built in 40 years of teaching, but it's not about me that we need to talk about now." Her gaze turned to the hallway where Juniper had disappeared with Lavinia. "That girl, she appeared at our makeshift shelter a few weeks ago. She never talks about her family, but she carries a cardboard box that she keeps like a treasure. And today, when she arrived desperate talking about the baby she had helped save, I realized that she had something special, something that reminded me a lot of your look as a child, Theodore, before—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't have to. Ted knew exactly what she was talking about. Before he turned into the cold and calculating man he was today, before abandoning his family in search of wealth, before losing his humanity. The sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway interrupted them. Lavinia was returning, her face pale and tense. "Mr. Vasconcelos, Mrs. Hayes, we need to talk. It's about Juniper." At that moment, looking at the doctor's grave expression, Ted felt that his life was about to change even more drastically The empire he built, the meetings he missed, the commitments he ignored, everything seemed insignificant compared to what was to come. And he had no idea how many surprises this night still held. The meeting room in the pediatric wing seemed even colder under the fluorescent light of the early morning. Ted, Eleanor, and Lavinia sat around the round table while a nurse stayed, with Juniper, who was now sleeping, sedated after the tests. "Juniper has a severe congenital heart defect," Lavinia began, her hands squeezing a folder of exams with unnecessary force. "The type of condition that should have been diagnosed and treated since birth. The fact that she has reached the age of 6 without medical supervision it's almost a miracle." Ted felt the weight of those words. Beside him, Eleanor lowered her head, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "I knew something was wrong," the woman murmured. "She always got tired very quickly, even in simple games. But on the streets, how could we—" "How long does she have?" interrupted Ted, his voice harsher than he intended. Lavinia took a deep breath, her green eyes showing a mixture of professional concern and personal anguish. "Without surgery, months, maybe weeks. Her heart is very strained." A heavy silence fell over the room. Outside, the rain continued to fall, as if the sky itself were crying for little Juniper. "And with surgery?" asked Ted, already mentally calculating his resources. "The surgery is complex and expensive," Lavinia explained. "We'd need a specialized team, specific equipment. This hospital doesn't have the facilities for—" "How much?" he insisted, interrupting her again. "Around $300,000, with all the recovery, and I'll pay it." The words came out of his mouth before he could think. Eleanor raised her eyes, surprised by the determination in his voice. "It's not that simple, Mr. Vasconcelos," Lavinia continued. "We need authorization from her legal guardians, and so far Juniper refuses to talk about her family." It was at that moment that Eleanor cleared her throat, hesitant. Maybe I can help with that. There's something you need to see." The woman explained that Juniper kept a cardboard box in her corner of the makeshift shelter. Under the overpass, a box she never let anyone touch. "She sleeps hugging it," Eleanor said, muttering things about important documents, about a place called Angel's Rest. Ted felt his heart skip a beat. Angel's Rest was the name of the orphanage that his company helped financially through a social responsibility program created by Kleber. "The orphanage was closed 2 months ago," he said, more to himself than to the others. "There were allegations of irregularities, but Kleber assured me everything was under control." "We need that box," Lavinia decided, "if there are any documents that help us understand her legal situation." "I'll go get it," Ted offered, already getting up. "No," Eleanor interrupted. "They don't trust people like you down under the overpass. I'll go. But—" She hesitated, looking out the window. "That area isn't safe at night, especially with this rain." "I'll drive you," Ted decided. "I'll stay in the car while you get the box." Lavinia watched them prepare to leave, a wrinkle of concern on her forehead. "And there's one more thing about baby Liam." They both stopped at the door, turning to her. "The tests confirmed it. He has a rare genetic condition that will require continuous treatment with expensive medications. We're talking about very high monthly costs." "How much?" Ted asked again. $20,000 per month." Ted nodded without showing any reaction. In other times, that amount would be insignificant to him, but now, with Kleber probably blocking his financial movements due to his unexplained absence. "We'll figure it out," was all he said. The drive to the overpass was silent. Ted carefully maneuvered the car through the slippery streets, while Eleanor looked out the window, lost in thought. "Your mother would be proud," she said suddenly. "Of what? Of seeing you care about someone besides yourself again." The words hit Ted like a slap. Memories he had buried deep began to emerge. His mother, Margaret, always so kind and concerned about others. The disappointment in her eyes when he announced he was abandoning the family to dedicate himself to business. Did you keep in touch with her?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Until the end," Eleanor replied, softly. "She never lost hope that one day you would go back to being that good-hearted boy I knew." Before Ted could process that information, they arrived at the overpass. The place was even more desolate than he imagined. Dozens of people were sheltering from the rain in makeshift tents and cardboard boxes. Eleanor got out of the car, being immediately recognized by the residents. Ted watched, impressed, how everyone treated her with respect and affection. Even in that precarious situation, she maintained a dignity that commanded admiration. 15 minutes later, she returned with a soaked box in her arms. As soon as she got in the car, Ted turned the heater on full blast, noticing how she was trembling. "It's all here," she said, holding the box carefully. Her whole story. Back at the hospital, they found Lavinia talking in hushed, agitated whispers with a man in an expensive suit in the hallway. Ted immediately recognized his partner, Kleber. "Finally found you," Kleber said, a smile that didn't reach his eyes on his face. "We need to talk. Now." There was something predatory in the way Kleber looked at the box in Eleanor's arms, something that made all of Ted's instincts scream in alert. "Tomorrow," he replied firmly. "Right now, we have more urgent matters." "I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation," Kleber insisted, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "The investors are furious. There are rumors of a surprise audit, and now you're here, playing the Good Samaritan with—" "I said tomorrow." Ted cut him off, his voice leaving no room for discussion. Kleber adjusted his expensive tie, a gesture Ted knew well. It was what he did when he was about to strike back. "As you wish. But don't say I didn't warn you." Turning to leave, he added over his shoulder, "By the way, fascinating how coincidences happen, isn't it? A child appearing right in your parking lot with an abandoned baby." The comment made Ted freeze. There was something in the way Kleber spoke, a veiled insinuation that made his stomach churn. As soon as he was gone, the three gathered in the small doctor's lounge. Carefully, Eleanor opened the soaked box. Inside, protected by plastic bags, were documents, photos, and a worn notebook. "My God," Lavinia whispered, picking up one of the photos. In it, a group of children smiled in front of a building with the sign, "Angels Rest Orphanage." Juniper was among them, thinner and smaller, but with the same penetrating gaze. "There's more," Eleanor said, removing a large envelope. "These are documents from the orphanage, entry records, medical reports, and this." It was a series of handwritten notes detailing amounts and names. Ted felt his blood run cold as he recognized Kleber's handwriting. "These are records of embezzlement," he explained, his voice hoarse. "Money that was supposed to go to the care of the children for medical treatments." "Like what Juniper needed," Lavinia completed, the anger evident in her voice. But there was something else. At the bottom of the box, a folded piece of paper protected by several plastic bags. When Eleanor opened it, everyone held their breath. It was an old photograph, yellowed by time. In it, a much younger Eleanor smiled beside a gentle-faced woman holding a baby. "That's," Ted began. "Your mother," confirmed Eleanor, tears streaming down her face. "And you, just a few months old. It was the day she invited me to be your godmother." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Ted looked at his former teacher, his godmother, as if seeing her for the first time. All the empire he built, all the money he accumulated, suddenly seemed empty and meaningless. A scream from the hallway broke the moment. It was the nurse who was taking care of Juniper. "Dr. Lavinia! The girl! She's gone!" Panic spread through the hospital corridors like wildfire. Lavinia ran from one side to the other, coordinating the search, while security guards checked every exit. Ted felt his heart pounding in his chest, guilt consuming him from the inside. If something happened to Juniper... The security cameras, he remembered suddenly. The hospital must have a monitoring system. In minutes, they were all in the small security room where a night guard was rewinding the last recordings. Black and white images showed Juniper waking up alone in the room, apparently confused. She looked around, as if looking for something, and then her eyes widened when she saw something out of the camera's range. "Next camera," Lavinia requested, leaning over the monitor. The next sequence showed the girl walking hurriedly down the hallway, following someone, a tall, slender figure who moved in the shadows. "Stop there!" exclaimed Eleanor. "Go back a few seconds." The guard obeyed and everyone held their breath. In the frozen frame, it was possible to see a revealing detail. The mysterious figure was wearing a gold pin on their lapel, the same pin that Ted had seen earlier on Kleber's tie. "That son of a bitch," he murmured, his fists clenched. "He must have overheard our conversation about the documents." "But why take the girl?" questioned Lavinia, her voice trembling with concern. "She needs urgent medical attention." "Because Juniper is the only witness," Eleanor replied, her face pale. "The only one who can confirm how and where she found baby Liam." The next images showed Juniper and the mysterious figure descending a rarely used service staircase. The last camera captured them leaving through a side door where a dark car was waiting. "I can see the license plate," said the guard, zooming in on the image. "I'll pass it on to the hospital security to notify the authorities." "No," Ted interrupted abruptly. Everyone looked at him, surprised. "If we involve the police now, Kleber might... He has powerful connections. We need to find her ourselves." "But how?" asked Lavinia, the frustration evident in her voice. "We have no idea where he took her." It was then that Eleanor stepped forward, her eyes shining with an idea. "Actually, maybe we do. Ted, do you remember your parents' old summer house, the one in the lake region?" Ted frowned, long-buried memories resurfacing. "The lake house. But it was sold years ago after—" "No," Eleanor interrupted. "Your mother never sold it. She kept the property, hoping that one day... Well, she left it to you in her will. Kleber took care of all the paperwork when she passed." The revelation hit Ted like lightning. "So technically the house is still mine?" "Yes. And more importantly, it's isolated away from the city and..." Eleanor hesitated. "Kleber has always shown a strange interest in it. Your mother even commented to me that she saw him hanging around the property sometimes. It's our best chance," Lavinia decided, already grabbing her purse. "But Juniper can't go too long without medical supervision. Her heart..." "I'm going with you," Eleanor declared firmly. "No," Ted protested. "It's too dangerous." "That girl trusts me," the woman insisted. "If she's scared in a strange place, she'll need to see a familiar face." There was no time for discussion. In minutes, they were all in Ted's car, heading down the road that led to the lake. The rain had subsided to a fine drizzle, but the sky remained overcast, making the night even darker. During the journey, Lavinia took the opportunity to make an important call. "Dr. Beatrice, sorry to call you at this hour, but I need an urgent favor. That baby who arrived today with the rare genetic condition..." "Yes, him. Can you keep an eye on him? I have a bad feeling." In the back seat, Eleanor held the box of documents tightly, as if her life depended on it. "There's something you need to know," she said suddenly, "about Angel's Rest." Ted adjusted the rearview mirror to see her better, while keeping his eyes on the slippery road. A few weeks before the orphanage closed, rumors started circulating among the children. "Juniper told me. On the nights at the shelter, they talked about night visits, about babies who disappeared mysteriously. "How do you mean disappeared?" asked Lavinia, turning in the passenger seat. "Babies who arrived during the night and disappeared before dawn. Juniper said she saw strange movements, expensive cars arriving in the early hours. That's why she started watching the orphanage, even after it was closed. And that's how she found Liam," Ted completed, the pieces starting to fall into place in his mind. "Yes, she told me she had seen a woman crying, leaving something near the dumpster. Juniper waited for her to leave and went to check." "My God," Lavinia whispered. "Do you think that Kleber was using the orphanage as a front for something much more sinister?" Ted completed, his voice filled with anger. "I'm almost certain, and the documents in that box should prove it." The GPS indicated they were approaching their destination. Ted turned off the headlights and stopped the car at a safe distance from the entrance to the property. Through the trees, they could see lights on in the house he hadn't visited in over a decade. "There's a car parked there," Lavinia whispered, pointing to a dark vehicle partially hidden behind the house. "It's the same one from the hospital cameras." "How are we going to get in?" asked Eleanor, her voice trembling slightly. Ted closed his eyes for a moment, trying to remember the floor plan of the house. "There's a service entrance in the back. Mom always left the key hidden in a flower pot." "We don't need the key," Lavinia interrupted, pointing to a side window. Through the glass, they could see Juniper, sitting alone on an old sofa, hugging her knees. Even at that distance, it was possible to notice that she was very pale. "She needs her medication," Lavinia said, already grabbing her medical bag. "The stress can greatly worsen her condition." Ted signaled for everyone to remain silent. On the other side of the house, they could hear raised voices. One of them, undoubtedly, was Kleber's. "We can't risk it. That brat saw too much." And now, with those documents, a second voice, which Ted didn't recognize, replied something in a lower tone. "Damn it!" Kleber cursed. "Everything was so perfect. Years building this scheme. Rich families paid a fortune to jump the adoption line, and those desperate women received enough to start over somewhere else. Everyone won. Except the children," Eleanor murmured, tears of anger streaming down her face. Ted signaled for Lavinia and Eleanor to stay where they were. Carefully, he approached the window where Juniper was. The girl's eyes widened when she saw him, but he quickly signaled for her to be quiet. The window was locked from the inside, but Ted knew that house like the back of his hand, or at least he used to. Feeling around the frame, he found the small defect in the wood that always made the lock fail when pressed at a certain angle. A few seconds of tension later, the window opened silently. Juniper practically threw herself into his arms. "It's okay," he whispered, feeling the girl's heart beating too fast. "We've come to get you." But before they could move, a voice cut through the silence behind them. What a touching scene! Ted turned around slowly. Kleber was standing in the doorway, an expression that mixed fury and amusement on his face. In his hand, he held the documents that had been in Juniper's box. "You know, Ted," he continued, his voice dangerously calm, "you've always been so predictable, always going back to the places of your past, even swearing you'd left it all behind." He took a step forward, and the moonlight revealed something that made Ted's blood run cold. Besides the documents, Kleber was holding something else in his hand, something that gleamed menacingly in the darkness. The object in Kleber's hand was an old silver lighter, which he handled with a disturbing familiarity. Ted felt Juniper tremble in his arms as she saw the small flame light and extinguish repeatedly. "You've always been afraid of fire, haven't you, Ted?" Kleber taunted, a cruel smile forming on his lips. "Since that incident in your childhood. How did the story go?" "Oh, yes, little Ted, locked in the basement during a small fire." The words hit Ted like a punch in the stomach. That memory, which he had buried so deep, was still able to make his hands sweat. Instinctively, he squeezed Juniper tighter against him. "How do you know that?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. Kleber's smile widened. Your mother told me. She trusted me so much, you know. While you were too busy building your empire, I was here, being the son she deserved to have. Outside the window, hidden in the shadows, Lavinia and Eleanor watched the scene with horror. The doctor held her emergency kit tightly, knowing that Juniper could have a heart attack at any moment due to the stress. But that doesn't matter now, Kleber continued, slowly approaching. What matters is that you're ruining years of hard work. Do you know how long it took me to build this network? How many contacts, how many deals? He threw the documents on, the floor between them. They were detailed records of transactions, names of wealthy families, astronomical amounts, the entire illegal adoption scheme exposed on paper. And now, his voice took on a darker tone, because of a street urchin and an abandoned baby, you're willing to throw it all away. It was then that something unexpected happened. Juniper, who until then had been trembling silently in Ted's arms, raised her head and spoke, her voice small but firm. You hurt Liam. Kleber seemed genuinely surprised by the intervention. What's that? I saw you, she continued, each word carrying a courage that didn't match her frail body. That night, at the orphanage, the lady didn't want to leave the baby, but you said it was the only way. You said you were going to hurt her if she didn't leave him. The revelation hung in the air like toxic smoke. Ted felt his heart ache as he realized the weight of what Juniper had been carrying alone all this time. Clever little girl, Kleber growled, all pretense of civility abandoned. Too clever for your own good. It was at that moment that Eleanor did something unexpected. Emerging from the shadows, she entered through the window with surprising agility for her age. Enough, Kleber. Her voice had an authority that made everyone turn to her. It's over. Mrs. Hayes? The surprise on Kleber's face quickly turned to mockery. Shouldn't you be under some overpass? I should be in many places, she replied, advancing fearlessly. Just like all those children should be with their real families, not being sold as commodities. While Kleber's attention was focused on Eleanor, Lavinia took the opportunity to silently enter through the window, her medical kit prepared. And you, Eleanor continued, now only a few steps away from Kleber, should be ashamed. Margaret trusted you. She treated you like a son. The mention of Ted's mother's name seemed to hit something deep in Kleber. For a moment, his mask of cruelty faltered. She never loved me like she loved him, he exploded, pointing at Ted. Even after he abandoned her, even after everything I did for her, it was always Ted this, Ted that. It was then that Juniper began to cough violently, her small body convulsing. Lavinia immediately ran to her, taking her from Ted's arms. She needs her medication now, the doctor warned, already preparing an injection. Her heart can't take this much stress. Kleber watched the scene with a mixture of frustration and despair. The lighter in his hand trembled slightly. You don't understand, he said, his voice taking on an almost pleading tone. I did all this for her, to prove I could be better than you. The money from the adoptions, part of it always went to her treatment. What treatment? Ted asked, confused. It was Eleanor who answered, her voice filled with sadness. Your mother was sick, Ted, very sick. The last years were incredibly expensive, Kleber completed. And where were you? Too busy counting your millions to notice she was dying. The word hit Ted like lightning. His mother had passed away years ago, but he never knew the details. Kleber always took care of everything, keeping him intentionally away. While that revelation settled in, Juniper visibly worsened. Her breathing was becoming increasingly difficult, and her face took on a worrying shade of blue. We need to get her to the hospital immediately, declared Lavinia, already picking up the girl in her arms. She's going into cardiogenic shock. It was at that moment that something snapped in Kleber. His eyes took on a manic gleam. "No one's going anywhere," he declared, raising the lighter. "Not until we resolve this my way." With a quick movement, he threw the lit lighter towards the old curtains. The dry fabric, which hadn't been maintained for years, caught fire instantly. Panic settled in the room. Ted felt his old trauma paralyzing his muscles, while the flames began to spread rapidly through the old wood of the house. Eleanor, surprisingly, was the first to act. "Through the kitchen!" she shouted. "There's a back door!" Lavinia ran with Juniper in her arms, followed by Eleanor, but Ted remained paralyzed, his eyes fixed on the flames that were now consuming the room. "See?" Kleber laughed bitterly, picking up the documents from the floor. Always the same scared little boy. It was Juniper's distant cough that finally broke Ted's trance. The sound of that child suffering, needing him, was stronger than any trauma. "You're wrong," he said, his voice finding a strength he didn't know he had. "I'm not that boy anymore." With a quick movement, he advanced on Kleber. The two men rolled across the floor, fighting for the documents while the flames approached. It was then that a deafening sound cut through the air. Part of the old ceiling began to collapse under the intense heat of the fire. And in that moment, surrounded by flames and fighting with the man who had destroyed so many lives, Ted realized that some things were more important than any financial empire, more important than any past trauma, more important even than life itself. The heat was suffocating. The flames danced around Ted and Kleber, rapidly consuming the old wood of the house, turning memories into ashes. The sound of the fire mixed with the creaking of the ceiling beams, creating a terrifying symphony. "You never understood, did you?" Kleber shouted, still clutching the documents as he fought with Ted. "It was always about you, the prodigal son, the successful businessman, the man who abandoned everything and was still adored." Another crash shook the house. Another part of the ceiling began to collapse. Through the increasingly dense smoke, Ted could see Lavinia in the back door, screaming. His name. She had managed to get Juniper and Eleanor out, but refused to leave without him. "Get out of here," Ted ordered between fits of coughing. "Take Juniper to the hospital." "Ah, yes, the sick little girl," Kleber mocked, taking advantage of the distraction to land a punch on Ted's face. "Another lost soul for you to play the hero with, just like your mother, always wanting to save everyone." The mention of his mother ignited something in Ted. With a brusque movement, he managed to snatch the documents from Kleber's hands. Papers flew through the air, some being immediately consumed by the flames. "Tell me the truth," Ted demanded, pushing Kleber against the wall. "What happened to her in the last years?" Kleber's smile, even in that desperate situation, was disturbing. "You really want to know? You want to know how she spent sleepless nights waiting for a call from you? How she kept every newspaper clipping that mentioned your great business achievements?" A burning beam collapsed near them, spreading sparks. Ted felt the heat burning his skin, but he didn't let go of Kleber. "She had cancer," Kleber continued, his voice now choked. "Terminal. The doctors gave her 6 months, but she fought for 2 years. You know why? Because she hoped to see you one last time." The words hit Ted harder than any physical blow. His legs buckled, and Kleber took the opportunity to break free. "The experimental treatment was incredibly expensive," he continued, circling Ted like a predator. "The health insurance didn't cover it. So I found a way. Rich families were willing to pay fortunes to expedite adoption processes. And there were so many desperate women. You used the suffering of innocent children," Ted accused, regaining strength in his voice. "I did what was necessary," Kleber bellowed. "While you were too busy building your empire, I took care of her. I held her hand during chemotherapy. I listened to her delusions about how her beloved son would come back one day." Another crash, closer. The smoke was becoming unbearable. In the doorway, Lavinia was screaming more and more desperately. "And you know what she told me at the end?" Kleber continued, coughing violently. "On the last day, when she could barely speak, she said, take care of my Ted, even at the end. It was about you. It was then that a sharp cry cut through the air, overlapping the crackling of the flames. It was Juniper. Even at a distance, even through the roar of the fire, Ted could hear her labored breathing. "She needs to get to the hospital now!" Lavinia shouted. At that moment, something changed in Kleber's eyes. It was as if a curtain had been raised, revealing decades of accumulated pain and resentment. "You have a choice now, Ted," he said, his voice taking on an almost gentle tone. "You can try to take me down, expose the whole scheme, be the hero once again, or you can save that girl." As if to emphasize his words, another part of the ceiling collapsed, partially blocking the path to the back door. Ted looked at the documents in his hands, the proof of all of Kleber's crimes, and then at the door, where he could see Juniper being supported by Lavinia and Eleanor. "It's not a difficult choice, is it?" Kleber taunted. "You've always been the protector of the weak and oppressed, just like your mother." With a deliberate movement, Ted looked at the papers one last time. Proof after proof of Kleber's criminal scheme, records of destroyed lives, stolen dreams. "You're right," he said finally. "It's not a difficult choice." In a fluid motion, he threw the documents on the floor. Kleber smiled triumphantly, but his smile was short-lived, because Ted wasn't running to the door. Instead, he was advancing towards him. "What are you doing?" Kleber asked, recoiling. "What I should have done a long time ago," Ted replied. "Honoring my mother's memory." With renewed strength, he grabbed Kleber by the collar. The man tried to resist, but years of comfortable life behind a desk were no match for the determination that now drove Ted. "You're crazy!" Kleber shouted as he was dragged towards the door. "You're going to kill us!" "No," Ted replied, his voice calm despite the effort. "I'm going to save us. All of us." With a last push, he managed to push both of them through the passage that was rapidly closing with flaming debris. They rolled across the wet lawn, coughing and gasping. Immediately, Lavinia began to administer first aid to both of them, while Eleanor held Juniper, who was crying copiously. "Why?" Kleber asked between fits of coughing. "Why save me?" Ted, lying on the grass and watching his childhood home be consumed by the flames, replied softly, "Because it's what she would have done." Sirens began to sound in the distance. Someone, probably a neighbor, had seen the fire and called the fire department, but Ted barely registered the sound. His eyes were fixed on Juniper, who was now trembling violently in Eleanor's arms. "She's not doing well," Lavinia warned, already preparing another dose of medication. "We need to get to the hospital immediately." As he struggled to get up, supported by Eleanor, Ted noticed something interesting. Some of the documents he had thrown on the floor had flown out of the house. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to prove what Kleber had done. "Ted," Juniper called weakly, extending her small hand to him. "You came back." He held her hand, feeling how cold it was, despite the intense heat of the fire. "I came back, little one, and I'm not leaving anymore." The sirens were closer now. Kleber, still lying on the grass, began to laugh. It was a bitter, almost hysterical laugh. "You think it's over?" he taunted. "This is just the beginning. There's a lot more to this story that you don't know, Ted. A lot more." But Ted wasn't listening anymore. His focus was entirely on Juniper, who was struggling to keep her eyes open. "Let's go," he said, picking her up carefully in his arms. "We have another little angel waiting for us at the hospital." As they walked towards the car, leaving behind a burning house and a crumbling empire of lies, Ted realized that Kleber was right about one thing. This was just the beginning. The beginning of a new story. A story of redemption, of second chances, of family found in the most unlikely places. a story that his mother would have been proud to tell. The return to Oakhaven General Hospital was a race against time. In the backseat of Ted's car, Lavinia monitored Juniper's vital signs constantly, while Eleanor held the girl's hand, murmuring words of comfort. In the passenger seat, Kleber remained silent, his hands handcuffed with an improvised tie, guarding his secrets like a locked safe. "We're not just losing Juniper," Lavinia said suddenly, her voice tight. "Her blood pressure is dropping fast. Ted, we need to get there soon." The businessman pressed the accelerator even harder, ignoring all speed limits. His hands, stained with soot, gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. Every time he looked in the rearview mirror and saw Juniper's pale face, his heart ached more. "She's strong," Eleanor murmured, more to herself than to the others. "She survived so long on the streets, and she'll survive this too." It was then that Lavinia's cell phone rang, breaking the tense silence of the car. It was Dr. Beatrice from the neonatal ICU. "What?" The color drained from Lavinia's face as she listened. "When?" "No, keep him stable. We're coming." Ted felt his stomach churn. "What is it?" "It's Liam," Lavinia replied, hanging up the phone with trembling hands. "He had a crisis. The genetic condition is causing complications we didn't foresee." A cruel smile formed on Kleber's face. "Interesting how things connect, isn't it?" "What do you mean by that?" Ted asked, casting a hard look at his former partner in the rearview mirror. "That rare genetic condition of the baby, didn't you find it strange? 1 in a million people are born with it, and just this baby ended up in your parking lot?" Lavinia frowned, connecting invisible dots. You knew about Liam's condition before." "I know a lot of things, Doctor," Kleber interrupted, his tone arrogant even in that situation. "I know, for example, that certain wealthy families would pay fortunes for a baby with exactly that condition. Something about private medical research, experimental treatments." "You monster!" exclaimed Eleanor, hugging Juniper tighter. "You were planning to sell that child to be used as a guinea pig?" "Guinea pig is such an ugly word," Kleber replied, shrugging. "I prefer to think of it as an investment in the future of medicine." Ted braked sharply, causing everyone to lose their balance. They had arrived at the hospital. The medical team was already waiting for them at the emergency room entrance, alerted by Lavinia during the trip. In minutes, Juniper was being rushed to the pediatric ICU, while another group of doctors ran with Liam to a special procedures room. "We need to operate on Juniper immediately," declared Dr. Ricardo, head of cardiology. "Her heart is failing." "Do whatever it takes," Ted authorized, already pulling out his credit card. "Cost is no object." "Actually," a familiar voice interrupted. It was Olympia, his ex-wife, standing in the doorway of the waiting room. At 45, she still maintained the same elegant posture that had attracted him 2 decades ago. "Maybe it is a problem." Ted felt his blood run cold. Amid all the chaos, he had completely forgotten about Kleber's threats about the surprise audit. "Your accounts have been blocked, Ted," Olympia continued, advancing into the room. "The board of directors called an emergency meeting an hour ago. You are officially removed from the presidency of Vasconcelos Supermarkets." "How?" he began, but was interrupted by Kleber's laughter. "You really thought I didn't have a plan B?" he taunted. "While you were playing hero, my contacts on the board were very busy protecting their own interests." Lavinia stepped forward, her green eyes flashing with anger. "2 children could die if they don't receive immediate treatment. And it's a tragedy," Olympia replied, her tone falsely sympathetic. "But there are procedures to be followed, protocols." It was then that Eleanor, who had been quiet until then, rose from her chair. There was something in her posture that made everyone in the room pay attention. "Olympia Vasconcelos," she said, her voice carrying an authority that surprised everyone. "Do you remember me?" Ted's ex-wife frowned, studying the woman's face for a few seconds. Suddenly, her eyes widened in recognition. Mrs. Hayes, from St. Joseph? Yes, the same teacher who one day sat with a young student crying because she had discovered she was pregnant at 16. The color drained from Olympia's face. Please! The same teacher who helped that student tell her parents, who supported her throughout the hidden pregnancy, who held her hand when she decided to give the baby up for adoption because she couldn't afford to raise him. Ted watched the scene with growing understanding. Kleber's words about coincidences began to make a disturbing sense. That baby, Eleanor continued, her voice now softer, had the same rare genetic condition that little Liam has today. Isn't that right, Olympia? The silence that followed was deafening. Olympia had leaned against the wall, her legs seeming unable to support her. How did you know about Liam? Asked Lavinia, connecting the pieces. How did you know we needed authorization for his treatment right now? Because she never stopped following the son she gave up for adoption, Eleanor replied. Even from afar, even in secret. And when Kleber discovered that, Ted completed, the comprehension hitting him like lightning, he used the information to manipulate you, to get your help on the board against me. Olympia slid down the wall to sit on the floor, tears streaming down her face. He said he knew where my son was. He said he could help me find him, but only if you helped destroy Ted, Eleanor concluded, shaking her head sadly. It was at that moment that an alarm sounded in the ICU. Lavinia immediately recognized the code. "It's Juniper!" she cried, already running towards the room. Ted made a move to follow her, but stopped when he heard his ex-wife's voice. "Wait!" called Olympia, rising with difficulty. I can help. My authorization still stands on the board. I can release an emergency amount." "Why?" Ted asked, studying the face of the woman he once loved. "Because," she replied, wiping away her tears, "no one knows better than I what it's like to see a sick child and not be able to help." As they ran to the ICU, Ted realized that the circle of secrets and lies was finally beginning to break. But would it be too late for Juniper and Liam? In the ICU room, the machines continued to sound their relentless alarms, while the medical team fought to stabilize the small patient. And somewhere in the hospital, a baby with a rare genetic condition was also fighting for his life, connecting destinies in a way that no one could have predicted. The night was far from over, and more revelations awaited in the shadows, ready to emerge and change the lives of everyone involved forever. The ICU hallway turned into a silent battlefield. On one side, in the pediatric ward, Dr. Ricardo's team fought to stabilize Juniper. On the other, in the neonatal ICU, Dr. Beatrice and her team worked tirelessly with little Liam. In the middle, Ted paced back and forth, his suit still smelling of smoke, carrying the weight of decisions he never imagined he'd have to make. "The compatibility tests are in," Lavinia announced, appearing in the hallway with a folder in her hands. Her coat, once impeccable, was crumpled after hours of intense work. "And you need to sit down to hear this, Ted." He obeyed mechanically, letting himself fall into one of the plastic chairs in the waiting room. Eleanor held his hand, while Olympia kept her distance, leaning against the opposite wall. "Liam's genetic condition," Lavinia began, choosing her words carefully, "is extremely rare. So rare that there are only 3 documented cases in the US, and one of them was my son," Olympia completed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Lavinia confirmed, "but there's more. We did the genetic compatibility test between Liam and all the records we have in the system, and we found a match that is, well, statistically improbable." "What do you mean?" Ted asked, his heart racing. "Liam has a 25% compatibility with Juniper." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. It was Eleanor who first understood the implication. "My God," she murmured. "They're half-siblings," Lavinia confirmed. They share one biological parent. Olympia slid down the wall to the floor, her legs giving way under the weight of the revelation. So, when Kleber said he knew where my son was, he wasn't talking about the baby you gave up for adoption 20 years ago, Ted completed, the anger growing in his voice. He was talking about Liam. As if invoked by the mention of his name, Kleber appeared in the hallway, escorted by 2 hospital security guards. His ironic smile remained in place, even with his hands still bound. "Bravo!" he applauded sarcastically. "Finally, the pieces are starting to fall into place. But there are still some missing, aren't there, Olympia?" "Shut up," she ordered, getting up with difficulty. "Why, don't you want Ted to know the whole truth? About how you found out you were pregnant again a few months ago, how you sought help at Angel's Rest, how you decided you couldn't go through all that again." "Stop it!" Olympia screamed, tears streaming down her face. But Kleber didn't stop. "Or maybe we should talk about how you found out that the baby had the same genetic condition as the son you gave up for adoption years ago. How did you panic? How did you beg me to help find a family that could afford the treatment?" Ted watched the scene with a mixture of horror and understanding. "It was you. You left Liam in that dumpster." "I didn't want to," Olympia sobbed. "But Kleber said he had a family waiting, that they would pick up the baby in minutes, that he would have the best possible treatment." "And you believed him?" asked Eleanor, her voice filled with disappointment. "I was desperate. I couldn't afford the treatment. I couldn't see another son suffer from this condition." It was then that a piercing sound cut through the discussion. The alarm from the pediatric ICU went off again. "She's fibrillating!" shouted Dr. Ricardo from inside the room. Lavinia ran to help, but stopped at the door, turning to Ted. "There's one more thing you need to know. The 25% compatibility between Juniper and Liam means they share the same father." The revelation hit Ted like a punch in the stomach. He turned to Olympia, who was now crying openly. "Who's the father?" he asked, his voice trembling. Before she could answer, another alarm started to sound, this time in the neonatal ICU. "The baby is going into shock," announced Dr. Beatrice. Chaos settled in the hallway. Doctors and nurses ran from one side to the other, carrying equipment and medications. In the midst of the confusion, Kleber began to laugh, a hysterical sound that echoed through the hospital walls. "Isn't it ironic?" he taunted. "All this time looking for answers, and the truth was right under your nose, Ted. Literally. What are you talking about?" "Think about it," Kleber continued, savoring each word. "Why would I be so interested in these children? Why would I keep such detailed records? Why would I care about a specific genetic condition? It was Eleanor who put the pieces together first." "No," she whispered, bringing her hand to her mouth. "You wouldn't be capable." "And why not?" Kleber replied, his smile now revealing a deep bitterness. "After all, what is a family besides a set of shared genes? And speaking of genes..." He was interrupted by a cry coming from the pediatric ICU. It was Juniper, who had woken up in the middle of the procedure and was calling for Ted. "We have to start the procedure now," shouted Dr. Ricardo. "We can't wait any longer." "But without authorization from the legal guardian," a nurse began. "I authorize it!" Ted and Olympia shouted simultaneously. It was then that Kleber dropped his last bomb. "How touching! Father and mother united for the good of their children. Too bad you didn't know you were a father until now, did you, Ted?" The world seemed to freeze. Ted felt the ground disappear beneath his feet as the implications of that revelation hit him. "No," he murmured. "It can't be." "Why not? Did you really never wonder why your mother insisted so much that you meet the son Olympia gave up for adoption? Why she kept in touch with Olympia even after the divorce?" The memories began to fit together like pieces of a macabre puzzle. The strange looks from his mother when he mentioned charity work with children. Her insistence on keeping photos of babies with the same rare genetic condition. "Your own son," Kleber continued mercilessly, carrying the same condition that you carry in your genes without ever manifesting it. And now, 20 years later, another son of yours with the same genetic marker. What a fascinating coincidence, don't you think? The hallway began to spin. Ted staggered, being supported by Eleanor. The voices of the doctors seemed to come from far away, mixing with the sound of the machines and muffled cries. "Why?" he managed to ask, his voice almost unrecognizable. "Why do all this?" Kleber's smile finally disappeared, giving way to an expression of pure bitterness. "Because you needed to feel," he replied. "Feel what it's like to have something precious torn from you. Feel what it's like to discover truths that destroy everything you believed." Before anyone could react, a new alarm sounded, more urgent, more desperate. "Cardiac arrest!" someone shouted in the pediatric ICU. And in that moment, with 2 lives hanging by a thread, Ted realized that some truths come with a price too high to pay. The night was far from over, and the secrets revealed were just the tip of an iceberg of pain, redemption, and perhaps hope. Time seemed to drag on in the ICU hallway, each second weighing like an eternity. Inside Juniper's room, the medical team worked frenetically to resuscitate her, while in the neonatal ICU, Liam fought his own battle. Ted was paralyzed between the 2 rooms, his world collapsing with each beep of the heart monitors. "Charge to 200, shouted Dr. Ricardo. The sound of the defibrillator echoed through the hallway, followed by the thud of Juniper's small body jumping on the bed. "Still no pulse," reported a nurse. "Increase to 250. Olympia had shrunk into a corner, her hands trembling uncontrollably as she muttered disjointed prayers. Eleanor held her former student, both united by the weight of the revelations and the fear of what was to come. "Did you know?" Ted asked suddenly, turning to his former teacher. "Did you know about my children?" Eleanor took a deep breath before answering. "Your mother told me part of the story before she passed, about the first baby, the one Olympia gave up for adoption. Margaret discovered the truth through medical exams. The rare genetic condition could only have come from you. Why didn't she ever tell me?" "She tried, Ted." Eleanor's voice was filled with sadness. "All those times she insisted you meet Olympia's son, all the attempts to get closer, but you were too busy building your empire." Across the hallway, Lavinia emerged from the neonatal ICU, her face marked by exhaustion and worry. "We managed to stabilize Liam," she announced, "but he needs a specific transfusion immediately, and with that rare genetic condition." "I'm the father," Ted interrupted, his voice firm for the first time since the revelations. "I can donate whatever he needs." "It's not that simple," Lavinia explained. "The condition that you carry in your genes, but that has never manifested itself. In your children, it expresses itself differently. We need a donor who has exactly the same type of genetic expression." "The first son," Olympia murmured, raising her tearful eyes. "He would be compatible." It was then that Kleber, who was watching everything with a sadistic smile, let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, what a pity," he mocked. "If only we knew where to find that boy." "Oh, wait, I know exactly where he is." Ted lunged at his former partner, being held back only by Eleanor. "Where is he?" he demanded, his voice trembling with anger. "So close and yet so far," Kleber taunted. "You know that story about how I built my part of the empire, about how I started from scratch. What does that have to do with—" Olympia began. "Everything," Kleber cut her off. "Because I didn't start from scratch. I started with an inheritance. The inheritance from my adopted son. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the machines seemed to have lowered their beeps, as if they were also processing the revelation." "No," Olympia whispered, staggering. You adopted my baby?" "Our baby," Ted corrected automatically, the word sounding strange in his mouth. It was so easy, Kleber continued, savoring each word. A desperate young mother, a baby with an expensive condition to treat, an adoption system full of loopholes. And best of all, no one would ever suspect that the powerful businessman had built his fortune with the money from the experimental treatment that never happened. "You let him go?" asked Eleanor, horror in her voice. Kleber's smile faltered. For the first time, he was weak, like all of you. He couldn't handle the pressure of being a real businessman. "You monster!" Olympia screamed, lunging at him. "What did you do with my son?" It was at that moment that a new sound cut through the air. Juniper's heart monitor had changed its pattern. "We have a pulse," announced Dr. Ricardo. "Weak, but it's there." Lavinia ran to the room, but stopped at the door. "She's asking for you, Ted." With trembling legs, he entered the room. Juniper was surrounded by machines and tubes, but her eyes were open, focused on him with an intensity that broke his heart. "Dad," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible under the oxygen mask. The word hit Ted like lightning. How did she know? Then he noticed, next to the bed, lying on the floor during the resuscitation, was a crumpled piece of paper. An old photo, which must have been in Juniper's box all along. In it, a much younger Olympia was holding a baby, and next to her, himself, smiling, unaware that that would be the last time he would see his firstborn. You knew?" he asked, holding Juniper's small hand. She nodded weakly. "Found the picture at the orphanage. Had your name on the back. I looked for you, but then I found Liam." Tears were now flowing freely down Ted's face. All this time, his own daughter had been looking for him, had found her younger brother, had risked everything to save him. "Dr. Ricardo," a nurse called urgently. "Her pressure is dropping again." "No," Ted murmured, squeezing Juniper's hand. "Please, no." It was then that a commotion in the hallway caught his attention, a young, male, authoritative voice. "Where are they? Where's my father?" Ted felt his heart stop. That voice, running. To the door, he saw a scene he would never forget. A young man of about 20 with his same eyes, wearing a crumpled medical coat, staring at Kleber with pure contempt. "Dr. Raphael?" asked Lavinia, surprised. "Weren't you on duty today?" "I wasn't," replied the young doctor, without taking his eyes off Kleber. "Until I received a call from my old elementary school teacher, telling me an incredible story about my biological parents and my siblings." Eleanor smiled through tears, her cell phone still in her hand. "I always kept in touch with him. I promised your mother I would take care of all of you, even from afar." "Raphael," Kleber began, his arrogance finally giving way to fear. "Son? I'm not your son," Raphael cut him off. "I never was. And now I know why you freaked out when you found out I had decided to become a doctor instead of taking over your business. Why you got so angry when I started working at this very hospital." "You're compatible," Lavinia interrupted, her eyes shining with hope. "With Liam and Juniper, you have the same genetic expression of the condition." Raphael nodded, already rolling up his sleeves. "And unlike what this monster did to me, I'm not going to deny treatment to my siblings." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Raphael donated blood for Liam, while his medical expertise with the genetic condition helped the team stabilize both children. Kleber was taken away by hospital security, his last words being swallowed by the sound of the elevator doors closing. In the pediatric ICU, Ted watched his 3 children together for the first time. Raphael examined Juniper with professional care, but his hands trembled slightly as he touched his younger sister. Through the glass of the neonatal ICU, they could see Liam, his color finally improving after the transfusion. "She's going to need surgery," Raphael explained, his voice choked, "and Liam will need continuous treatment. But now they have a real chance." "We'll get through this," said Olympia, entering the room timidly. "Together." Ted looked at his ex-wife, at his eldest son, he never had a chance to know, at his little warrior Juniper, and at the baby who had united them all. Somehow, amid all the pain and secrets, a family was being born. But there was still one last revelation awaiting in the shadows, a truth that would change everything again. And it would come from the most unexpected place possible. Morning arrived at Oak Haven General Hospital, bringing a new reality for everyone. In the pediatric ICU room, now calmer after the turbulent night, Juniper slept a medicated sleep while Raphael adjusted her heart monitor. The young doctor worked with professional precision, but his eyes betrayed the contained emotion every time they landed on his newfound sister's face. Ted watched the scene from the armchair in the corner, where he had spent the last hours trying to process all the revelations. His eldest son, a doctor, moved around the room with a familiarity that showed years of dedication to the profession. How different would it have been if he'd been present in his life from the beginning? "She's much more stable now," Raphael said, breaking the silence. "The compatible blood made a significant difference, but we still need the surgery." "When?" Ted asked, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "As soon as possible. Dr. Ricardo is organizing the surgical team for this afternoon. The longer we wait—" He was interrupted by Lavinia, who rushed into the room. "Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this," she said, turning on the small television attached to the wall. The local news showed live images of the Vasconcelos supermarket's headquarters. A crowd of reporters jostled at the entrance, while police officers escorted figures in suits into patrol cars. Following anonymous reports, the federal police launched Operation Fallen Angel this morning, which investigates a multi-million-dollar scheme of embezzlement and illegal adoptions involving Angel's Rest Orphanage and one of the largest supermarket chains in Minnesota. Olympia, who had fallen asleep in a nearby chair, woke up startled by the noise of the TV. "How?" she began, but was interrupted by Eleanor, who entered the room carrying a thick folder. "I kept copies of everything," said the woman, her face showing a mixture of sadness and determination. "All the documents that Juniper collected, all the records that your mother left, Ted. Margaret knew that one day the truth would have to come out. My mother—" Ted felt his heart ache. "What records?" Eleanor sat heavily in a chair, the folder on her lap weighing like lead. "Your mother didn't just fight cancer in recent years, Ted. She fought to gather evidence, to understand what was happening with the donation money, to find out why so many babies were mysteriously disappearing from the orphanage." "But she trusted Kleber," argued Olympia. "No," Eleanor corrected. "She pretended to trust him. It was her way of keeping her enemies close. Every conversation, every confidence that Kleber made, thinking she was too weak to understand. She recorded everything." Raphael, who had stopped his medical work to listen, frowned. "That's why he always tried to keep me away from her," he murmured. "The few times I managed to visit my biological grandmother in the hospital, Kleber freaked out. Because Margaret recognized you immediately," Eleanor completed. "Even weakened, even with all the medication, she knew you were her grandson, and she began to investigate further." With trembling hands, the former teacher opened the folder. Inside, in addition to the documents that Juniper had collected, was a meticulously maintained diary, photos, receipts, recordings on pen drives. "She documented everything," Eleanor continued. "How Kleber used the donation money to finance illegal adoption schemes. How he manipulated wealthy families and vulnerable women. How he—" She hesitated, looking at Raphael. "How he forced you to study administration, trying to turn you into his image." "But I resisted," said Raphael, a sad smile on his lips. "I fled to medical school as soon as I could. He never forgave me for that." Because you were the final piece of his plan, Eleanor explained, the perfect heir to his empire of lies. When you chose another path, he started looking for other children to manipulate, Ted completed, the realization hitting him like lightning. That's why he was so interested in Liam. And that's why he was furious when Juniper showed up, Lavinia added. She wasn't just an inconvenient witness. She was living proof that his plans always went wrong. The soft sound of the television continued in the background, showing more details of the police operation. Among the prisoners, familiar faces from the board of directors, senior employees, people Ted considered allies. There's something I still don't understand, he said, turning to Eleanor. If my mother had all this evidence, why didn't she report it sooner? The woman exchanged a meaningful look with Olympia before answering, because she discovered something even worse, something that Kleber did that goes far beyond the adoption schemes. At that moment, a soft moan came from the bed. Juniper was waking up, her eyes opening slowly. "Dad?" she called weakly. Ted was by her side in an instant, holding her small hand between his. "I'm here, little one." "The bad man," she began, her voice choked. "He hurt the pretty lady." "What pretty lady, dear?" asked Lavinia, approaching the bed. "The one who left Liam. She didn't want to, but he said he was going to hurt her other baby if she didn't leave him." The revelation fell like a bomb in the room. "Another baby?" "Juniper," Raphael called, his professional tone mixed with gentleness. "Have you seen this lady other times?" The girl nodded. "At the orphanage. She worked there. She took care of the little kids. She was so pretty and sad." "Do you know her name?" asked Olympia, her voice trembling. Beatrice." It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Lavinia staggered, having to lean against the wall. "Dr. Beatrice?" She whispered. "From the neonatal ICU." As if answering the question, an alarm began to sound, coming precisely from the neonatal ICU. Through the window of the room, they could see intense movement of nurses running. "Liam!" Olympia cried, already running to the hallway, but when they arrived at the neonatal ICU, they found only an empty crib, and on it, an abandoned white coat with the name embroidered, Dr. Beatrice. "My God," Lavinia murmured, realizing the truth. She's Liam's biological mother. And Kleber was blackmailing her, Raphael completed, his medical mind putting the pieces together quickly. That's why she always took the shifts in the neonatal ICU. That's why she insisted so much on personally caring for Liam when he arrived. And now she's taken him, Ted concluded, feeling the panic growing in his chest. It was then that they noticed something strange. Eleanor's cell phone was ringing. On the screen, an unknown number. With trembling hands, the woman answered, putting it on speakerphone. "Mrs. Hayes." A female, tearful voice sounded through the device. "This is Beatrice. I know you must hate me now, but I need your help. Kleber, he has my eldest daughter, said that if I didn't follow his plan with Liam..." The voice choked, being replaced by a contained cry. "Where are you?" Eleanor asked gently. "In the only place where it all began," replied Beatrice between sobs. "In the place where Margaret discovered the truth." Ted and Eleanor exchanged glances. There was only one possible place, the lake house. And so, barely recovered from the last battle, they found themselves forced to return to the scene where so many truths came to light. But this time, it wasn't just Liam's life that was at stake. It was the chance to finally unearth the deepest and darkest secret of all. The secret that his mother had taken to the grave, but not without leaving clues so that one day, when everyone was ready, the truth could finally come to light. The lake house looked different in the morning light. The walls, blackened by the recent fire, contrasted with the clear sky, like a scar on the bucolic landscape. Ted's car stopped at a safe distance while its occupants observed the movement. On the partially destroyed porch, Beatrice was there, cradling Liam in her arms. Even from a distance, it was possible to see that she was trembling. The baby seemed peaceful, oblivious to the drama unfolding around him. "She looks so young," Olympia murmured from the back seat, where she was holding Juniper's hand. The girl had insisted on coming, even against medical advice, claiming that she needed to see the end of the story. 28 years old, replied Raphael, who had quickly researched his hospital colleague's background. Started working at Angel's Rest at 18 as a volunteer. That's when she met Kleber. Ted felt his stomach churn. 10 years under that monster's control. How many other lives had he destroyed in his sick obsession? "I'm going to talk to her," Eleanor decided, already opening the car door. "No," Ted interrupted. "I'll go. She needs to know she's not alone in this." He got out of the car slowly, keeping his hands visible so as not to scare Beatrice. As he approached, he could better see the signs of exhaustion on her young face. Deep, dark circles, eyes red from crying, hands that wouldn't stop trembling. "Dr. Beatrice," he called softly. She hugged Liam tighter. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want to. I had no choice." "Your daughter," Ted began. "Where is she?" "With the babysitter," Beatrice replied, tears streaming down her face. "A trusted lady of Kleber's. He said that if I didn't follow the plan, if I didn't convince that poor woman to leave Liam—" "Olympia," Ted completed, "his biological mother." Beatrice nodded. "I didn't know, I swear I didn't know she was your ex-wife. I only found out when I saw the compatibility tests, when I realized that Liam had the same rare genetic condition that—" She stopped abruptly, her eyes widening as she saw something behind Ted. Raphael had gotten out of the car and was slowly approaching. "That I have," he completed. "The condition I inherited from my biological father." "Your father?" Beatrice seemed about to collapse. "Then you're—" "The first," Raphael confirmed. "The son Kleber adopted and tried to turn into his image. It was then that the sound of an engine cut through the air. A car was approaching at high speed on the dirt road, raising a cloud of dust. "No," Beatrice whispered, her face losing all color. "He found out. He's going to—" "No one's going to do anything," Ted assured, positioning himself protectively in front of her and the baby. "It's over, Beatrice. The police have already arrested Kleber and his accomplices. Your daughter is safe." "No, you don't understand." She was almost hysterical now. "It's not just my daughter. It's what happened here in this house 10 years ago. What your mother discovered." The car stopped abruptly, skidding on the dirt. The driver's door opened, and a familiar figure emerged. It was Amanda, Kleber's personal secretary. "Stay away from her, Ted," Amanda ordered, her voice carrying a surprising authority. "This is between me and Beatrice." "Amanda?" Ted was confused. "What do you have to do with this?" The secretary laughed, a bitter and humorless sound. "Everything. I have everything to do with this. Or do you think Kleber could keep this scheme running alone for so long?" From the car, Eleanor let out a cry of recognition. "My God, you're the nurse." "What nurse?" asked Raphael. "The one who took care of Margaret in the last months," replied Eleanor, her voice trembling. "The one who had access to all the medications, to all the conversations. The one who made sure she never managed to tell the whole truth to anyone," Amanda completed, a cruel smile forming on her lips. "But that stubborn old woman still managed to leave clues, still managed to find a way to protect her precious evidence." It was then that Juniper, who had quietly gotten out of the car with Olympia, stepped forward. "In the box," she said, her voice small but firm. "Mrs. Margaret left everything in the box she asked to be kept at the orphanage." Amanda turned to the girl, her eyes flashing with anger. So it was you, the little busybody who was snooping around, who took the box before. We could destroy it. Enough! Beatrice's voice cut through the air like a whip. She had taken a step forward, still holding Liam, but now with a new determination in her eyes. They need to know the truth. About that night, about what really happened to Margaret. Don't you dare, Amanda threatened. Margaret didn't pass away because of cancer, Beatrice continued, ignoring the threat. She discovered everything. The adoption scheme, the embezzlement, how you were selecting children with the rare genetic condition to sell to research laboratories. What? Raphael felt his legs weaken. That's why Kleber was so obsessed with you, Raphael. That's why he tried so hard to control you. You weren't just an heir, you were a genetic goldmine. Amanda had taken something out of her blazer pocket, something that gleamed in the morning light. Last chance, Beatrice, she warned. You know what happens to those who talk too much. But Beatrice didn't stop. It was as if a dam had broken, years of secrets and guilt gushing uncontrollably. Margaret confronted Kleber in this house, said she was going to report everything, and then she had a tragic accident, Amanda completed coldly. A wrong dose of medication, a body weakened by cancer. No one questioned it, no one, except a young nurse from the orphanage who witnessed everything hidden. You, said Ted, looking at Beatrice. That's why Kleber had so much power over you. Beatrice nodded, tears streaming down her face. He said he would do the same to my daughter, if I told anyone. And then, when I found out I was pregnant again, he saw an opportunity, Raphael completed, the realization hitting him. A new baby with the rare genetic condition. That's why he forced you to convince Olympia to abandon Liam, so he could sell him too. It was then that something extraordinary happened. Juniper, who had quietly approached Amanda, did something no one expected. She kicked the gun out of the woman's hand. The object flew across the porch, falling between the planks of the partially burned deck. Amanda turned to grab the girl, but was surprised by another movement. Olympia had thrown herself on her, knocking her to the ground. Now! Eleanor shouted. As if they had rehearsed it, Raphael and Ted advanced together, immobilizing Amanda while Beatrice ran into the car with Liam. Sirens began to sound in the distance. Lavinia, who had stayed at the hospital, had alerted the police as soon as they lost contact. It's over, Ted said, watching the patrol cars approaching. It's finally over. But there was something in Amanda's eyes, even immobilized, that disturbed him. A smile that said there was still more to this story. You really think it's over? She taunted. How about asking your ex-wife about the real reason she gave Raphael up for adoption? About who really financed the beginning of the Vasconcelos empire? Olympia, who was helping Juniper to get up, froze. What are you talking about? Ted asked. Ask her about the visit she received in the hospital right after giving birth. About the offer she couldn't refuse. But before she could continue, she was interrupted by the arrival of the police officers. In minutes, Amanda was being taken away, joining Kleber in prison. However, her last words had planted a seed of doubt that couldn't be ignored. Because Olympia was too pale, too trembling, for this to be just another taunt. There was one more. Truth to be revealed. A truth that connected all the pieces, that explained why Kleber had gained so much power over all of them. A truth that, like the lake house in flames, threatened to consume everything in its path. The return to the hospital was made in a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional whimpering of Liam and Juniper's labored breathing. In the back seat, Beatrice cradled the baby, while Olympia kept her eyes fixed on the passing landscape, avoiding Ted's questioning gaze in the rearview mirror. Raphael drove carefully, his hands gripping the steering wheel with unnecessary force every time they passed a pothole in the road. Beside him, Eleanor flipped through the folder with Margaret's documents, looking for something that could explain. Amanda's last words. It was Juniper who finally broke the silence. Mom, she said softly, surprising everyone by addressing Olympia for the first time with that word. "Why are you crying?" Olympia quickly wiped away the tears that she hadn't even realized were falling. "It's nothing, dear, just difficult memories." "About when you had to leave Raphael?" The innocent question hit Olympia like a punch in the stomach. She looked at her eldest son through the rearview mirror, finding in his eyes the same desperate need for answers. "Maybe," said Eleanor gently, "it's time to tell the whole truth." Olympia took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she took a yellowed envelope from her bag. "I've kept this all these years. I never had the courage to admit." Ted recognized the letterhead even before she opened the envelope. It was the same that his company used to this day, the Vasconcelos Supermarket's logo, but in an older version. "It was 3 days after Raphael was born," Olympia began, her voice choked. "I was in the hospital, desperate because the doctors had just diagnosed the rare genetic condition. The treatment was incredibly expensive, and we were so young, so unprepared. That's when he showed up," Eleanor completed, a painful understanding dawning on her face. "Yes, Kleber's father, Ricardo Mendez. He owned a small chain of markets at the time, nothing compared to what it is today. Said he had a deal to propose. To me." Raphael stopped the car on the shoulder, unable to continue driving while listening to that story. "What kind of deal?" he asked, his voice trembling. He offered to pay for all the treatment, ensure that you would have the best doctors, the best medicines, but in exchange you had to give the baby up for adoption," Ted completed, feeling his heart ache. "To him." Olympia nodded, tears running freely down her face now. "It wasn't just that. He wanted me to convince you, Ted, to accept a job at his company, said he saw potential in you, that you could turn that small chain into an empire." "And I accepted," Ted murmured, old memories returning with new clarity. "I thought I had gotten the job on my own merit. His plan was perfect," Olympia continued. "You would dedicate yourself entirely to work, thinking you had conquered everything alone. Meanwhile, Kleber would be raised alongside with me," Raphael completed, "like brothers, for him to learn the business, to have the same ambition." "But it didn't work as planned," said Beatrice softly, still cradling Liam, "because you were different. You had compassion, you wanted to help people instead of profiting from them. And that's when Ricardo realized he had bet on the wrong son," Eleanor added, "when he understood that you, Raphael, would never be the ruthless heir he wanted." "That's why he started training Kleber differently," said Olympia. "Harder, crueler. And when he found out about the genetic condition, about how laboratories would pay fortunes for research with rare cases like that, he created the adoption scheme," Ted completed, "looking specifically for babies with the same condition." "But why didn't you ever tell us?" Raphael asked, turning to Olympia. "After Ricardo passed, after you found out what they were doing." "Because they still had power over me," she replied, taking another document from the envelope. "Ricardo left clear instructions. If I ever told the truth, Kleber should make sure that you never had access to the treatment you needed." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft sound of pages being turned. Eleanor had found something in Margaret's folder. "Here," she said, showing an old note. "Margaret discovered everything shortly before the end. She was gathering evidence not only of the adoption scheme, but of how Ricardo and Kleber had manipulated all of you from the beginning." "That's why they couldn't let her live," murmured Beatrice. "That's why Amanda was so careful to make sure. She never managed to tell." It was then that Juniper, who was unusually quiet, let out a small moan of pain. Her face was pale, her hands pressing her chest. "We need to get back to the hospital now," warned Beatrice, her medical instinct taking over. She can't go without her medication for so long. Raphael started the car again, but before leaving, Olympia held Ted's arm. "There's one more thing you need to know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About why Ricardo chose you specifically." Ted felt a chill run down his spine. "Why?" "Because—" Olympia hesitated, looking at Eleanor for support. The former teacher nodded slightly. "Because he was taking revenge on your biological father, the man who had refused to sell his small grocery store to him years before, preventing his plans of expansion." The revelation hit Ted like lightning. His father, the man he barely knew, who had passed when he was very young, had owned a grocery store, one of the few that had resisted the aggressive expansion of Ricardo's markets. So everything, all this, started with revenge, Eleanor completed. "Ricardo used you to build the empire that your father refused to help him create, and in the process, destroyed not only your family but dozens of others." The sound of Juniper's portable heart monitor began to beep more intensely, urgently. "Later," Raphael said, speeding up the car. "We have to deal with that later. Now we need to save our sister." As the car sped down the road towards the hospital, Ted looked back. In the back seat, 3 generations of his shattered and pieced together family, Olympia cradling Juniper, Beatrice holding Liam, all united by pain, by secret, by the need for healing. And for the first time, he fully understood his mother's words, noted on the last page of her diary, which Eleanor had just found. "The true empire is not built with concrete walls or vaults full of money. It is built with bonds of love, even the most unlikely, even those born of pain. And when the truth finally comes to light, my son, remember, it's not blood that makes a family. It's the choice to stay together, even when it would be easier to separate." But there was still one last revelation waiting for them. A final truth that would change not only the fate of Juniper and Liam, but of everyone involved in that complex web of secrets and redemption. Oakhaven General Hospital was in an uproar when they arrived. The news of Operation Fallen Angel had spread, and reporters jostled at the entrance, trying to get more information about the illegal adoption scheme. Lavinia was waiting for them at the back entrance, her face showing concern as she saw Juniper's condition. "Straight to the surgical center," she ordered, as a team already prepared took the girl from Olympia's arms. "Dr. Ricardo is waiting." "Wait!" Juniper called weakly, reaching out to Ted. "Dad, the little box." "What little box, honey?" he asked, holding her delicate hand. "In my backpack, from the orphanage. There's something that Mrs. Margaret asked me to keep." Eleanor quickly opened the small, worn backpack that Juniper always carried with her. At the bottom, she found a small metal box, the type that holds old candies. It was closed with a small padlock. "The key?" she asked gently. "In my shoe," Juniper replied, already being taken away by the medical team. "She said you could only open it when you found the right family." As Raphael accompanied the surgical team, being the only one with medical authorization to participate in the procedure, the others gathered in the waiting room. Beatrice had taken Liam for follow-up exams, leaving Ted, Olympia, and Eleanor with the mysterious little box. The key was exactly where Juniper had said, hidden in a small compartment sewn into the lining of her old shoe. With trembling hands, Eleanor unlocked the padlock. Inside the box, there were only 3 items: a sealed letter, an old photograph, and a USB drive. The photo showed a scene that made Ted's heart clench. His mother, much younger, holding a baby in her arms. Beside her, a man he recognized as his biological father smiled at the camera. But there was something else in the picture, a detail that made Olympia let out a cry of surprise. In the background of the photo, partially visible through a window, there was a small grocery store, And on the sign, one could clearly read Hope Grocery of the Mendez brothers. My God, Eleanor whispered, Ricardo and your father were brothers. Ted felt the world spin. With trembling fingers, he opened the letter that his mother had left. My dear son, the message began, Margaret's handwriting still firm despite the illness that was consuming her. If you are reading this, it means that little Juniper managed to complete the mission I entrusted to her. Yes, I chose her specifically for this, long before you found her on that rainy night. Olympia and Eleanor approached to read along with him. The story you know about your family is only part of the truth. Your father, Thomas, and Ricardo were brothers who inherited the grocery store from their father. While Thomas dreamed of keeping the business small, family-run, Ricardo had greater ambitions. Thomas's refusal to sell his share was not just a business decision, it was an attempt to protect the legacy of kindness and honesty that your grandfather had built. So, when Ricardo offered that job, Olympia began, he wasn't just building his empire, Ted completed bitterly. He was using his own nephew to destroy his brother's legacy. The letter continued. Ricardo spent years planning his revenge. When he learned that you had become pregnant with Olympia and that the baby had the same rare genetic condition that existed in the family, he saw his chance. He used the situation to manipulate not only you, but also his own son, Kleber, turning him into a tool of revenge. That's why he was so obsessed, murmured Olympia. It wasn't just about money or power. It was personal, Eleanor completed. Every child he took from their family, every life he destroyed, it was his distorted way of punishing the brother who had betrayed his dreams of grandeur. But there's something more, the letter continued. Something I discovered only in my last days, when it was already too late to defend myself. Ricardo not only planned to use you, Ted, he also made sure that Thomas could never tell the truth. The USB drive contained a single file, an old video recorded precariously on a security camera. It showed the old grocery store and a heated argument between the two brothers. He didn't leave, Ted whispered, the comprehension hitting him like lightning. Dad didn't abandon us. He was forced to leave, Eleanor completed, tears streaming down her face. To protect you. It was then that Lavinia ran into the room, her face pale with worry. You need to come now, she said. It's Juniper. There's been a complication during the surgery. The surgical center was a chaos of activity. Through the observation window, they could see Raphael working frantically along with Dr. Ricardo, trying to stabilize his sister. Her heart is too weak, Lavinia explained. We need something to strengthen it before continuing the surgery, but with her genetic condition, common medications don't work. Wait, said Beatrice, who had just arrived with Liam in her arms. In my years at the orphanage, I saw something about that. There was an experimental treatment that Ricardo developed specifically for that condition. The treatment he promised to Raphael, Olympia recalled. Yes, but he never got to use it on any child, Beatrice continued. He kept the formula as a secret, a form of control. The formula is here, Eleanor interrupted, who continued to examine the contents of the USB drive. Margaret found and saved everything, every detail of the treatment. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Lavinia and Raphael worked together to prepare the medication, while Dr. Ricardo kept Juniper stable. Ted watched, helpless, holding Olympia's hand, both praying silently. It was then that another file on the USB drive began to run automatically, a video. On the screen, Margaret's face appeared, clearly recorded in her last days. My son, her voice was weak but determined. I know that when you watch this, a lot will have changed. You will have discovered painful truths, faced your own past. But remember, The true legacy of the Mendes family is not in the supermarkets or in the money. It is in the ability to make the right choice, even when it is the most difficult. The image trembled, and for a moment Ted could see tears in his mother's eyes. "Juniper was my choice," she continued. "When I saw her in the orphanage, I recognized in her eyes the same strength that you had as a child, the same determination as your father. I knew that she would be able to bring our family together again, to bring to light all the truths that needed to be revealed." "That's why she had all those documents," murmured Eleanor. "Margaret had prepared everything. And now—" Margaret's voice was failing. "It's up to you to make your choice, my son. The empire that Ricardo made you build can be transformed into something different, something that your father would be proud of." Juniper's heart monitor emitted a different sound. Through the glass, they saw Raphael administering the experimental medication, his eyes fixed on his sister's vital signs. Slowly, miraculously, the numbers began to stabilize. "It's working," announced Dr. Ricardo. "We can proceed with the surgery." Ted leaned his forehead against the glass, tears of relief streaming down his face. Beside him, Olympia sobbed silently, while Beatrice cradled Liam, who slept oblivious to all the drama. But there was something on Eleanor's face, who was still holding Margaret's letter, that suggested that there was still more to be revealed. A last truth that would change everything again. "There's one more thing," she said softly, turning the page of the letter. "About the real reason why Ricardo chose that specific night to make Olympia give Raphael up for adoption." And so, while Juniper fought for her life on the operating table, the last piece of the puzzle began to fall into place. A truth so shocking that it would make all the other revelations seem small in comparison. The last page of Margaret's letter trembled in Eleanor's hands as everyone gathered to hear the final revelation. Through the glass of the surgical center, they could see Raphael and Dr. Ricardo continuing the delicate operation on Juniper, their movements precise and focused. "The day that Ricardo forced you to give Raphael up," Eleanor began, reading Margaret's words, "was not chosen by chance. It was the same day that your father, Thomas, had scheduled to return." Ted felt his heart skip a beat. "How do you mean, return?" After years of being kept away by Ricardo, Thomas finally had gathered enough evidence of his brother's schemes. He was going to report everything, get his family back, but he never made it, Olympia completed, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," Eleanor confirmed, turning the page, "because Ricardo found out. And on the same night that he made sure that Raphael would be taken away, he also made sure that my father never reached his destination," Ted completed, feeling his legs weaken. Beatrice, who was cradling Liam silently, stepped forward. "That's why he chose the orphanage as the center of his operations. It wasn't just about the babies or the money. It was a constant reminder," Eleanor said, "of how he had the power to separate families, to destroy bonds that should be sacred." The silence that followed was broken only by the rhythmic beep of Juniper's monitors. The surgery continued, each second crucial for her survival. "But Margaret found out everything," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength. "In her last months, she wasn't just documenting the adoption scheme. She was gathering evidence of all of Ricardo's crimes, including what happened to Thomas." It was when Lavinia, who had left momentarily to check some exams, came running back. "You need to see this," she exclaimed, holding an envelope. "Of results, the complete exams of Liam. There's something we hadn't noticed before." Everyone turned to her except Ted, who kept his eyes fixed on his daughter on the operating table. "The genetic condition," Lavinia continued, "is not exactly the same as Raphael has. It's a variation, one that can only come from From the mother's family, Beatrice completed, looking at the baby in her arms with new eyes. My God, you're not saying that. Beatrice is my cousin. The hoarse and tired voice came from the doorway of the waiting room. It was Thomas Mendez, older, grayer, but with the same determined eyes that Ted had inherited. The daughter of my younger sister, who Ricardo also kept away from the family. The shock of the revelation was like a wave crashing through the room. Ted staggered, being supported by Olympia. Dad! His voice came out strangled, unrecognizable. Margaret managed to find me, Thomas explained, slowly entering the room. Shortly before the end, she told me about the plan, about how she had prepared everything so that the truth would come to light. That's why she chose Juniper, Eleanor said, finally understanding. It wasn't just because of the girl's strength, but because she would be the link that would unite all the broken pieces of this family. And that's why Ricardo and Kleber were so desperate when they realized who she was, Beatrice completed, tears streaming down her face. They knew that if she managed to put all the pieces together. A sharp sound cut through the conversation. Juniper's heart monitor had changed its pattern again. We're losing her, shouted Dr. Ricardo. Chaos settled in the surgical center. Raphael worked frantically, his skilled hands fighting to save his sister, while the team moved in a synchronized dance of urgency. It was then that Thomas stepped forward, resting his hand on the glass. She has the same spirit as her mother, he said softly, of my sister. The same strength, the same determination. What do you mean? Asked Ted, confused. Beatrice is not only your cousin, Thomas explained. Her mother, my younger sister, also had the genetic condition, but unlike me, who was only a carrier, in her the condition manifested itself. Ricardo used her illness as an excuse to keep away another part of the family that could expose his crimes. And when he found out I was pregnant, completed Beatrice, he used that as another form of control, threatened to do with my eldest daughter the same that he had done with Raphael, Olympia completed, the same that he forced me to do. Juniper's monitor emitted another warning sound, but this time it was different. The numbers began to stabilize, slowly returning to normal. The treatment, exclaimed Lavinia. It's finally working. Through the glass, they saw Raphael let out a sigh of relief as Dr. Ricardo began to finalize the surgery. It had worked. Juniper was going to survive. There's one more thing, said Thomas, taking a crumpled envelope from his pocket. Something that Margaret asked me to keep until the right moment. It was an official document dated 20 years ago. A birth certificate. Ricardo falsified the original documents, he explained. Made it seem that Beatrice was an orphan, that she had no family. But the truth is that we are all part of the same family, Eleanor completed, smiling through tears. United not by the empire that Ricardo built with hate, but by the love that Margaret cultivated even in the darkest moments. The following hours were a whirlwind of emotions. Juniper was transferred to recovery, her surgery a success. Raphael, exhausted but happy, was finally able to embrace the father he never knew. Beatrice, discovering herself part of a much larger family than she imagined, allowed herself to cry in the arms of her newfound uncles. A week later, in a sunny room at the hospital, a very different scene unfolded. Juniper, still weak but recovering, quickly was sitting in bed surrounded by her family, all of it. Ted and Olympia on one side, Thomas on the other. Raphael checked her vital signs while chatting animatedly with Beatrice, who held Liam. So, said Juniper, her voice stronger each day, does that mean Liam is my cousin? Second cousin, Raphael corrected, smiling. It's complicated, I know. It's not, she replied with the simplicity of children. It's family. That's all that matters. Ted watched the scene with a full heart. The empire that Ricardo had forced him to build was being dismantled, transformed into something new. The supermarkets would be sold, the money used to create a foundation, managed by Thomas, to help separated families reunite. The old Angel's Rest would be renovated, transformed into a support center for children with rare medical conditions, with Raphael coordinating the medical team and Beatrice overseeing the daily care. "Your mother would be proud," Thomas said, softly to Ted. "She always knew that one day you would find your way back home." "Actually," Ted replied, watching Juniper play with Liam, "I think it was the opposite. It was home that found me." That afternoon, as the sun set over Oakhaven, a small ceremony took place in the hospital garden. Juniper, sitting in her wheelchair, held the hands of Ted and Olympia as the judge formalized her adoption. Beside them, Beatrice cradled Liam, now also officially recognized as part of the family. "You know what's funny?" said Eleanor, who watched everything with teary eyes. "In the end, Ricardo achieved the exact opposite of what he wanted. Instead of destroying this family, he ended up being the reason why everyone reunited. And so, under the golden sky of Minnesota, a new story began. Not a story of empire and revenge, but of redemption and love. A story that started with a trash bag on a rainy night and ended with the discovery that sometimes the strongest bonds are those that we build after everything seems lost. Juniper, now officially Juniper Mendez Vasconcelos, looked at her gathered family and smiled. Her heart, now strong and healthy, beat in the same rhythm as little Liam, who slept peacefully in his mother's arms. It was the rhythm of love, of hope, of family. It was the rhythm of a new beginning.